In the Bible, among the offices of serving God, the greatest is the high priest. The high priest is the one who leads all the priests and Levites in service. That is the high priest. Among the high priests, the first high priest was Aaron. Aaron becoming the high priest. For what reason did he become the high priest? Aaron became the high priest because of God's calling. That he could serve as the high priest, even for the people of the Old Covenant, to be the high priest, it still required God's calling to become the high priest. How much more for the high priest of the New Covenant, who must even more be called by Lord God to become the high priest, because we know that, in the beginning, Aaron, along with Moses, after leading the Israelites out of Egypt together, God made a covenant with the Israelites. After making the covenant, he appointed Aaron as the high priest of the Old Covenant. Then the high priest, what was his duty? It was to serve God. One part was to serve God, and the other part was to make atonement for the people. The first part of it was to serve God, and the second part was to make atonement for the people. This was the high priest. The duties of the high priest. Now, let's look at the atonement of the Old Covenant high priest. He used cattle and sheep as sacrifices to make atonement for the people, so that God would forgive the people's sins. But, what about the people? They made atonement every year, but they still sinned every year. Sinned and then atoned, atoned and then sinned again, over and over again, an endless loop. Their sins were endless, and their sin offerings for atonement were also endless. Later on, we realize that the high priest of the Old Covenant could not truly make atonement for the people. If the people's sins had already been forgiven and their sins had already been washed clean, there would be no need to make atonement again the next year. In this way, later, we came to understand that the Old Covenant Israelites, year after year for people, making atonement for people, was because of their sinning. So they had to make atonement every year. But what about their sins? Atoning endlessly, and also endlessly making atonement, yet sinning endlessly again. For what reason was this? Because the high priest of the Old Covenant could not atone for people's sins at all. Why could the high priest of the Old Covenant not atone for people's sins? Because the high priest of the Old Covenant used cattle and sheep as sacrifices offered to Jehovah, offering cattle and sheep as sacrifices to Jehovah. Therefore, the sacrifices of cattle and sheep could not redeem people's sins at all. Just as Brother Heber often says, the value of a cow is only about 10,000 yuan. The value of a sheep is only 1,000 yuan. People cannot use an ox and a sheep to redeem the sins of the people. And the value of a person is far greater than that of an ox. For example, let's talk about a person. For example, a common person, the value of a person. How much is it worth? Can 1 trillion buy a person? As for the value of a human, it has always been priceless. And an ox, we can measure its value. An ox is just 10,000 yuan, and a sheep is only 1,000 yuan. So the value of cattle and sheep can be measured, but a person's value is 1 trillion. A person cannot be bought even with 1 trillion, so it can be seen. This makes us understand that an ox or a sheep cannot offset human sin at all. Then, who on earth can offset human sin? If there is such a person, whose value is far greater than the sum of all humanity, the value of his life is far greater than the sum of all humanity. Then his death, his dying to bear sins for others. Then his death can redeem sin. Then among humanity, could there really be such a person whose value is greater than the sum of all humanity? From among humanity, no such person can be found. But there is someone who came down from heaven to become man. Such a person, his value would be greater than the sum of all humanity. Do brothers and sisters know if there is anyone who came down from heaven, making his value greater than the value of the sum of all humanity? Could there really be such a person? There really is such a person, if there is such a person, and he is the Lord who created man. Then his value must be greater than the sum of humanity. This Lord who created man is Jesus Christ. Therefore, his sacrifice can offset the sins of humanity.